I just mixed a few squares of concrete for a patio that I'm making. Structure is at the bottom of everything I do. When I first started painting, I was just messing around, finding it fun to put color on paper and painting houses and chairs, and grids and squares showed up. And I realized that I could do that more directly. I could just paint the lines and the squares and the grids and the repetitions that were familiar and interesting to me from the fact that I was building houses for 25 years. And so that structure just became integrated with my way of seeing things and thinking about things. Look at the garden fence. It has squares. I did that partly because we need a fence around the garden to keep the animals out, but the way I did it has to do with the way I like it to look, with the grids. Look at the greenhouse. It has grids too, and in front of the porch. One of the first things I did with concrete is I made all these little squares and I laid them in a grid. I didn't, think, oh, I want to paint squares or structure. It's just that when I painted, they showed up, and then I went, oh, I know where that comes from. It was special to have this as the last major work I did, partly because it was working with Thomas in this particular house. I had built a couple of other buildings that he had designed, but this one was his own house, so he was much more personally involved. One of the things that we worked out really early on was that he didn't want to have everything totally finalized, and I was fine with that. We'd get together and I'd say, Thomas, I need to know this by next week. Okay, so then he'd go and draw, and then we'd build it that week. That was great. It was really fun. Now, what I can do with that, let's see what happens. These are all drywall tools. They're made for doing mudding. Most of these I bought just to paint with. It feels comfortable to me to use these rather than more typical painter tools. The way this red comes through underneath the blue there, that's the kind of thing I just really like. When I started to work on this series, which I ended up calling Consanguinity, I knew I wanted it to be about color, and I decided to make very severe restrictions on how I painted it. Each one has 2 colors that are painted on the canvas in exactly the same way, 20 layers of each color overlapping in the center. It was the most severe restriction that I could come up with. Restrictions free me. Within the constraints that I choose, I have clear paths, connections. The debris, the unimportant distractions can be swept aside. I can follow a path and see where that path leads me rather than having all these paths all over the place that I have to try to, like, which one? I started painting around 2000. I framed houses for at least 20 years before I started painting. Everything that visually happens to me has a connection, of course, to the fact that I built houses for so many years, and the structure that was there in my daily work always appears, whether I'm doing it intentionally or not. This house was originally built in 1908. When Marlene wanted to build an addition onto it, we had to figure out a way to make it fit with the original house. One way to do that is to repeat details in the new construction. This is a process that I often use, very thinned paint. There's very little actual pigment in it, so it takes many layers to make a change. This whole addition, starting at, you can see the old gable end right there. That's all new construction. On the back side of the house, we have a bank of windows in the old part, and then by repeating and making another bank of windows in the new addition, we tie the two together into one piece so that it has unity. And you can see it looks a little bit milky, but it doesn't dry milky, so it'll dry with just the red part that's in there. I decided that to show 150 years of time passing, I would paint yellow circles placed within a black square. And then I painted a thin layer of red over it. So the first one I did had 150 layers of paint accumulated on it, and the last one I did only had one. The rafters run from the house out to this end of the new roof. So they are put slightly tilted to follow the desired curve of the roof. The circle represents so much. It can represent the sun, the moon, the self. I think one of the things that I really liked most about framing was when the joists are up and you see this open grid against the sky, and it's just such a strong visual. Yeah, I don't know, it's just importantly special to me.